In this video, we're going to integrate ISE with Active Directory to test and troubleshoot, if necessary, the integration between the two of them. Let's begin. One of the challenges we're going to face is that if we have hundreds of users, we really don't want to go to the ISE server and create individual users like Bob hundreds of times. Instead, if we already have those user accounts like Bob inside of Active Directory, it makes a lot of sense to leverage that existing database of users. So the ISE server is at .117 on the 192.168.1 subnet. And our Active Directory 2012 server is at .123. And this is the same 2012 server that's running these certificate services for us as well. And to set this up, it's pretty simple. We simply tell ISE that when it tries to authenticate a user, it should go ahead and check with Active Directory to validate that user's credentials. So we go back to Bob's computer. The supplicant that supports EAP, and again, that could be the native supplicant or the network access manager from Cisco that we installed in our previous video, it's going to supply the credentials. The authenticator, the switch, supplies those credentials over to the ISE server. And again, this whole conversation, we have the outside tunnel where we can be using PEEP or EAP fast to protect the whole communication. And that's referred to as the outer tunnel. And then inside that, we could be using MSChap or some other mechanism for the actual authentication of Bob. So previously, the ISE server in its local identity store was handling the authentication. But now, if we train it to use the Active Directory, when it gets those credentials, it'll simply pass those over to the Active Directory, say, hey, are these credentials good or are they bad? So we're looking for 2 thumbs up or 2 thumbs down. And if it's 2 thumbs up, which is a pass, the Active Directory sends back a message to the ISE server saying, yep, those match, that's a valid user. And then ISE, with that good news, wants to pass that along over to the authenticator, the switch, which can now have an authorized port, which will now allow Bob's traffic to go ahead and be forwarded through the network. So to set up the Active Directory integration between the ISE server and Active Directory, we want to do some basic checks. First of all, we want to verify that everything is still working from our previous video. In fact, when you start up a lab, it's a great idea to verify base connectivity and basic functionality at the beginning so we know what we're working with. Also, when we add ISE to Active Directory, we need to make sure that we can resolve the Active Directory server via DNS. So what you and I want to do is make sure that this ISE server can use DNS resolution to resolve the Active Directory server. And a really easy way to do that is this. This Active Directory server is 2012. It's currently acting as our certificate authority. It's acting as a domain controller. And I also have DNS installed on it. So what you and I could do is we could tell ISE to specifically use the IP address of 192.168.1.123 as its DNS server. And then any queries that the ISE makes over to this 2012 server, any DNS queries, can be resolved by the 2012 server. And check this out. If there's an entry that's not there, we can simply go into the DNS configuration for the server and add those entries. So that's our very first step. Make sure we have basic functionality, including DNS, that can resolve the Windows server. Step number 2, we're going to join ISE into the Active Directory. And this part's really straightforward. All we're going to do is go into the ISE server and say, hey, we want to go ahead and join this Active Directory. We're going to put in some credentials as somebody who has the authority to join the domain. And that's really all it takes to have ISE join and become part of Active Directory. Now, the benefit of joining Active Directory is that we can now use Active Directory as an identity source. And step 3 addresses a little challenge that we have, and that is the ISE server is using the local identity store for the authentication of users. We need to create an identity source sequence that says, hey, you know what, Mr. ISE, why don't we check with Active Directory as well before we give up? And we can have an order. We can say, check Active Directory first. If you don't find the user there, then go ahead and use the local identity store. So let's verify a few things on the workstation first, Bob's computer. Now I currently have our AnyConnect set up with the Network Access Manager, and here's what I was testing. I wanted to verify the option of EAP fast that it worked correctly. So here's what I did. I clicked this button here, which gives us the option of managing our networks. I clicked on Manage Networks. I clicked on Add. I created a new entry called Test. And we can look at the details of that new entry by clicking on Edit. And all I did was I said it's wired. I called it Test. I said we're using 802.1x. I said we're using EAP fast. And it's going to be password based. I clicked on OK. And then I connected using that profile. Now, when I connected, it asked me if I wanted to trust the certificate that was being used by the ISE server. And I said yes to that. Now, we could prevent that from coming up by downloading and installing the root CA certificate from our 2012 server on this local PC. And in a prior video, we've already demonstrated the steps of adding a new root certificate to a Windows computer. The next thing that happened was it prompted me for a username. So I put in Bob, I put in the password, and I clicked OK, and then it connected. And because we have EAP fast selected, that's the method we use for the outer tunnel for the protection of the EAP authentication. And so that's how we're connected right now. Also, over this connection, I'm using RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, so that I can share this screen with you during this recording. So to verify that our current port is authenticated, we could go back to our switch. So this is the console of the switch that Bob's laptop is connected to. And we could issue the command show authentication sessions. And that will show us all the authentication that's currently happening on this switch. And at the moment, we just have that one port, gig 0/7. And if we use the up arrow key and then tack on at the end of that interface gig 0/7, it'll go ahead and give us the full details regarding the authentication on that port. So here it's showing us that we have .1x that was used for the authentication. Here it has Bob's MAC address and Bob's IP address. There's Bob's username, the success message. And down here it's showing us the order that we're doing the authentication. We have MAB first and then .1x, but because we also specified that .1x is preferable, when the port came up and the EAP messages were being seen by the switch, it chose to use .1x for the authentication. And it didn't even bother running MAB because it saw the EAP messages and there was successful authentication using the .1x. Now, just for fun, let's go ahead and bounce this port. So we'll go into configuration mode, interface gig 0/7, and we'll say shutdown. Now my RDP session is not going to be too happy for a moment or two, but it should come back and we should be fine. So now that it is shut down, we'll go ahead and do a up arrow key and a Control A and no in front of the shutdown to bring that interface back up, which should trigger all the authentication again. Now at the moment, I don't have debugs on. So we're not seeing all the nitty-gritty detail, but what we can see is that it started .1x authentication, and the result from that .1x authentication was success, which is fantastic. The next thing we got to do, I think, is take a look at the logs on the ISE server, just to see the details of that connection and the authentication that just happened. So to do that, we're going to log on to the ISE server. And as that logs in, let me share with you some details here. This ISE server is completely virtualized inside of VMware. And this Active Directory is also completely virtualized inside of VMware. And if you have interest in virtualization with VMware, you might want to check out the VCA course, which is pretty much an introduction to the world of virtualization in a VMware environment. And there's also a VCP course, which is the professional level for VMware training regarding data center virtualization. So if virtualization is interesting to you, you might want to make a note of those, and at some point go ahead and tackle those courses as well. I think you'll have a blast with them. So back to our ISE interface. If we go to Operations And from the drop down select authentications, we should be able to see the details regarding Bob's authentications. So the new entries are put on the top, and if we look at the timestamp, that is the most current one there. And if we click on this link for details regarding that authentication, it'll show us the play-by-play of what the ICE server went through in authenticating that user. So we'll do that. We'll click on the details link. So this is indicating that this authentication has happened more than once and is pretty much a repeat process. It's also telling us that it's showing the details for the first past attempt shown here below. So here's the overview, and then down below we have the additional details for the authentication. So if we scroll down a little bit, we've got the user of Bob. There's Bob's IP address. And look at this, the identity store that was being used for this authentication is the internal users, the internal identity store on the ICE server. The authentication protocol, it was using EAP fast, and that's great because that's what we told the Network Access Manager client to use. And that was for the outer tunnel. For the inner tunnel, it used MS-CHAP version 2. The authenticator was switch 1. The port on that network access device, also referred to here as a network access server, was gig 0/7. There's the IP address of our switch. And as we scroll down further, there's additional details regarding that authentication. Now, what I also want to point out is take a look at the right-hand side at everything that has happened. That's a lot of logic, a lot of steps that were gone through. And if we scroll down here a little bit, and we go to this entry right here, selected identity source internal users. The local database of the ICE server was used for the authentication of Bob. So it looked in the local database, it found it, and the authentication passed because the credentials were correct for Bob. In this case, the password for Bob was correct. And this is also an excellent tool that we can use for troubleshooting to see where in the process that things went south or things didn't work out. So there's less guessing involved and more pinpointing regarding the fault domain that we need to correct for our 802.1x authentication to work. Next, I'd like to test the basic DNS functionality to make sure that we can resolve our Windows server, which is at 192.168.1.123. So to do that, here at the console of the ICE server, I'm going to log in as admin and supply the password. So ICE, currently, this machine that we're looking at is at 192.168.1.117. Our Active Directory server is at .123. I want to verify basic connectivity between the ICE server and the Active Directory server just to make sure we have a clean path. So to do that, we'll do a ping out to 192.168.1.123. And there's our pings. So great, we have great connectivity between ICE and Active Directory. Let's try to ping by name. Let's ping server1.nuglab.com. And that is not coming back with any success messages. So because it's not coming back saying, yes, it's working, I'm going to do a Control-C to stop that. And I'm going to change the DNS information. Now, during the install, it asked me about what DNS server I wanted to use, and I told it. But now I need to change that, and I'm going to point it to the DNS service running on the Windows 2012 server. So to do that, we're going to go into configuration mode with a config T, and we're going to use the command IP. We'll do a question mark. There's an option for name server. That's the one we're going to use. And we can use tab to autocomplete. And the name server we want to use is 192.168.1.123. And we'll press enter. And it's giving us a warning saying, hey, if you modify this setting for AD connectivity, you must restart ICE for the change to take effect. Do you want to restart ICE now? I'm going to type in yes, press enter, and it's going to restart the ICE service on this server. Now, it's not rebooting the whole ICE server. It's simply restarting the services it needs to. And through the magic of editing, I edited out about 5 minutes of waiting while it shut it down and then restarted these services. It's It's also telling us that we can use the command show application status ICE just to verify that the services are currently running. So I'm game, let's do it. We'll get out of configuration mode and we'll do a show application status ICE and press enter. And based on this right here, it says it's not quite ready. It's still initializing. So we'll give it a couple more minutes, make sure it's fully initialized. So we'll use the up arrow key again just to verify that everything is running. And that looks much better. So if we did a show running config right here, it appears that what I did was I added a name server of 192.168.1.123, but it still has the original one of 192.168.1.1. So hopefully the name resolution that's going to be trying is going to fail from its primary DNS server and be able to use the .123. If that does not work, what I'll do is come back and we'll remove the primary DNS server so that it only has our Active Directory server as DNS. So that's step number one. We verified basic connectivity between ISE and Active Directory. We pointed ISE over to the DNS services running on Active Directory, and our second step is now to join ISE to Active Directory. To do that, we're going to log back into ISE, and from here, we're going to go to Administration, and from the drop-down for Administration, we have the section for Identity Management, and then within Identity Management, we have this option for External Identity Sources, and that's the link that we're going to click right now. Over on the left, we have our external identity sources. We're going to click on the Active Directory option. And then it's telling us exactly how to proceed. Put the domain name in. So we're going to put nuglab.com right here. And then we're going to give it a name. By default, it's calling it AD1, but we could give it another name if we wanted to. It's just a name that's referencing the Active Directory that we're going to be joining. So for the domain name, let's use nuglab.com, and we'll leave the identity store name as 81. So in the future, anytime we refer to 81, we'll be referring to an external Active Directory. And then we'll go down and click on Save Configuration. Next, you'll notice here it says that we are not joined to a domain. And that's because it does take some credentials to join a computer to a domain. So what we could do is take baby steps. To do that, we're going to select our ice.nuglab.com, and with it selected, we're going to click on this icon called Test Connection. It's a drop down, and from the drop down, let's start off with a basic test. It's asking us for a username and password that can be used to verify our connectivity and authentication ability with Active Directory. So we'll put in administrator, because I know that account exists, and I also know the password for administrator on the Active Directory because I set it up initially. And the password is the same password we've been using in this lab, and that's uppercase N UGGET exclamation mark 23. So we'll supply that password. We will click on OK. It'll go out and do a quick test and it says, hey, that worked. Congratulations. That user account and password is successful with Active Directory. So we'll click on close, and in the background, what it did was it resolved nuglab.com through a DNS request, and that's how it found the Active Directory server. So one of the key pieces in setting this up is to make sure that the DNS, whatever you're using for name resolution, can resolve the domain name where the Active Directory is playing a part. Now, since that was successful, let's take it to the next step. We'll go back to Test Connection. We'll click on it to expand the drop-down menu, and let's go to a detailed test. Now, it's giving us a message saying, hey, this may take a little while, and we'll say that's perfectly fine. We've got a little while. It's asking us again for credentials, which we will supply. We'll click on OK. So it's not just testing, does this account work? It's also checking on ports between the ICE server and the Active Directory server. So here it's showing us that the number of CPUs that this ICE server currently has is 4 CPUs. There's its IP address. It's complaining a little bit, saying, hey, I wasn't able to do a reverse lookup and resolve this IP address of 192.168.1.117. That's the IP address of the ICE server inside of DNS. It wasn't there. And that's because I didn't configure a reverse lookup in DNS for this host. And so far, that's not causing us any grief. So we'll scroll down a little bit. So it did some testing of Active Directory connectivity. All of these ports were allowed between our ICE server and our Windows 2012 server. And we can continue scrolling down for additional details. So now that we know that works, let's go ahead and join this ICE server into Active Directory. So from this same screen, we're going to go ahead and with ice.nuglab.com, that's our ICE server, with that selected, we're going to go ahead and click on the icon for Join. It wants the credentials for a user account in Active Directory that has the ability to join a computer to the domain. So I'm going to use our King Kong account administrator, supply the password, and click on OK. And it's chewing on that for a moment, and hopefully it's going to come back successful. And it says, congratulations, your status is successful. Please allow for 2 minutes for the status to be reflected, then press refresh. It's not talking about refresh of this screen. This is just a status message. But when we close this pop-up, the refresh it's referring to is this refresh right here. So if we wait the approximate 2 minutes it asks us to, and then we click on refresh, we should have different results here in the status indicating that we have successfully become part of the domain. So it's been a little bit of time. Let's go ahead and click on refresh. And as a result, it's happy connected to server1.nuglab.com. We are now connected to Active Directory. Another way of verifying that we are successfully part of Active Directory, meaning ICE is a computer in Active Directory, we could go over to the Windows server and take a look from the Windows perspective. To get to Windows, because this is all running in a virtualized environment, I'm going to go ahead and play the Wizard of Oz trick. We'll pull back the curtain for a moment. And here's our ICE server. A few moments ago, we were looking at it in full screen by using this icon right here. And if we want to take a look at the 2012 server, we simply click on that icon for that virtual machine, and then I'll go ahead and put that back in full screen mode, and we'll log in. So in a virtualized environment, a Control-Alt insert is the equivalent of a Control-Alt delete. We'll log into the Windows 2012 server. So I'm logging in as administrator, and we are in. From here, on this 2012 server, we'll simply click on the icon for Server Manager. If it's not already running, we'll bring it up. And from within Server Manager, up in the top right, we'll go to Tools. From the Tools drop-down menu, we can select the option for Active Directory users and computers. And again, our purpose here is just to verify that ICE really is part of Active Directory. And then if we expand NugLab and we go down to computers, this object in Active Directory is representing our ICE server. Hey, while we're right here, let's go ahead and create a user account. So there's administrator and there's guest. Let's create an additional user account. So I'm going to right click on users, select new from the drop down, and then from that drop down we'll select user to create a brand new user account. Now, because the laptop, Bob's computer, is in the other room, in order to avoid running back and forth and putting in credentials, which you wouldn't be able to see because we wouldn't have connectivity until those credentials were entered, I'm going to go ahead and use the same username of Bob here in Active Directory. So for the login name, I'm simply going to call him Bob. Now, we might be asking the question, well, if we authenticate with Bob in the local database of ICE, and we also have Bob in Active Directory, how do we verify that the Active Directory was actually used? And the answer is, once we authenticate, we can go take a look at the details of that authentication in ICE just to verify that it did use Active Directory and not the local database. So we'll click on Next. We'll put in the same password. And that way, on the laptop in our supplicant, the Network Access Manager, the credentials that are already sitting there will be perfect. I'm also going to remove the requirement that the user changes his password at the next logon, and I'm also going to say that the password never expires in our lab environment. And we'll click on Next. So now that Bob exists inside of Active Directory and ICE is part of Active Directory, we're going to go ahead and create an identity source sequence to tell ICE to go ahead and start using the Active Directory as one of its methods for authenticating users. So back at the ICE console, we're going to go to Administration. From the drop-down, over here in the Identity Management section, we're going to choose this option of Identity Source Sequences. We're going to create a new sequence that says, let's try Active Directory first. If we can't find the user there, then we'll go ahead and use the local configuration on the ICE server as we look for that user account called Bob. So we'll select Identity Source Sequences. There are some default sequences that are already present in ICE. We're going to create a brand new one by clicking on the Add icon. And let's call this something meaningful. Let's call it Use AD then Local. And what I've discovered is that if you put a lot of details in the description, that way in 2 weeks when you go back and look at it, you can hopefully remember what that's for. So if we go down a little bit here to the authentication search list, let's go ahead and put AD1, which represents our Active Directory. We'll select that, click on the arrow to put it in the list, and then if it can't find anything in Active Directory, we'll go ahead and say let's try the internal users. So we'll add that as well. Now if we want those in a different order, really easy. We could say internal users, hit the up arrow, and that would move it up. Or if we want internal users to be after Active Directory, we can select it and simply hit the appropriate arrow to move it in the exact sequence that we want checked. So here under the advanced search list settings, it says, what should I do if I can't access an identity store? And by default it's saying if it tries Active Directory, because that's the first one in our sequence, if that fails, if we can't access that identity store, meaning we're not getting a negative message from Active Directory, we're getting no response from Active Directory, the default behavior is to not try the other stores in the sequence and simply spit out an error message. In our case, if we can't reach Active Directory in our lab environment because it's not running at the moment or some other reason, we do want it to continue to our other identity sources in our sequence. So we're going to change that radio button to treat as if the user was not found and just keep on moving to the other identity sources. And with those set, we'll go ahead and click on Submit. So now you and I have this brand new identity source sequence that if we use it, it's going to go ahead and use Active Directory first. If we can't find the user there, it'll then go to the local configuration, the local users on the ICE server. Now, for our next trick, we're going to enforce that as a policy. And to enforce that, we're going to go up here in ICE to Policy. From the drop-down, we're going to select Authentication. So far, we've been using most of the defaults that came with the basic installation of ICE. We're now going to change some of that. So if we click on Authentication, so here in our authentication policy, we have these default policies for Mac authentication bypass as well as .1x. If we want to edit or look at the details of this .1x policy, we can simply click on the Edit link over here on the right-hand side. And you'll notice right here, as far as identity sources, it's using the internal user's identity source by default. And that worked perfect when we had the local user called Bob and we didn't have the option of using an Active Directory because it wasn't set up yet. But now that it's set up and we have a sequence that we've created, and with Edit selected, we're going to go over here to Internal Users, click on the plus symbol. We're going to use this option here to bring up a submenu. And check this out. Here we have the option for that sequence that we just created, the Use AD then Local sequence for identity sources. So we'll click on that. We'll click on Done. And here's the mistake a lot of people make. They'll click on Done. They think they're done, but there's actually hidden, if the screen isn't quite big enough, if we scroll down a little bit, there's a button called Save if we want to actually save this information. So we will scroll down to the very bottom and we will click on Save. So now we're going to use this sequence that we created for identity sources. We're going to try Active Directory first. If we don't find our user there, we'll then drop down to our local user identity store on the local ISE server. So our next step is to go ahead and test this. Let's go back to Bob's computer. It's currently connected. We'll use the drop down and let's connect to test again. Once we select a new profile, that's going to toggle the interface. If we bring the switch over here, that port just went through re-authentication. It says it was successful. We could use the command show authentication sessions for interface gig 0/7 to see the details of that, which indicates that it was successful. Fantastic. So our client's connected. I still have remote desktop that's still working, which is a great sign that we still have our connectivity there. And now, how do you and I go about verifying whether or not the authentication that just happened was using the local identity store or using Active Directory? Where would we go? This is my question for you. Where would we go in ISE to see the details of that authentication? Now, if you're saying, Keith, I know, we'd go to Operations, and then from that drop down, select Authentications. You'd be exactly correct. Good job. So we'll select Authentications. We'll click on the refresh icon to make sure we have the latest and greatest information. So we'll click on the details link, and and this doesn't look good. The fact that it says, yes, this authentication repeated several times indicates that it's not using some new method. On the right hand side, if we take a look at the steps and scroll down a little bit, we have some good and bad news. The good news is that Bob was successfully authenticated. The bad news is that it used the internal user database to do it. It didn't go out to Active Directory. So in troubleshooting this, we could do a couple things. Number one, we'd want to check our sequence to make sure it's correct. Secondly, to make sure that sequence is in use for 802.1x authentication. And let's do both of those right now. First, we'll go to Administration. We'll go to our identity source sequences. There's our sequence. We'll go ahead and click on Edit to take a look at the details of it. And it says use 81 first and then the internal users. So that part looks okay. And then we go to Policy and to Authentication. And for .1x, it's stating that we should use that sequence that we just created with AD first, then local. So all of our ingredients look good to me. I think our next step might be to just bounce that port from the switch. So let's bring our switch console over for a moment. We'll go into interface gig 0/7. We'll do a shutdown. We'll give it a second to cool its jets. And then we'll do a no shutdown. And that was pretty fast. So it started .1x. It was successful. Now let's go check and see whether or not it used Active Directory for that. So we'll go back to Operations in ISE, Authentications, and that doesn't look good because we have a repeat count, which means it used the same method it did previously for the authentication. So the curious thing is that it didn't even try Active Directory. So it could be some type of a caching issue on the ISE server, saying, oh yeah, it's Bob again. We've already authenticated him previously. Now in a lab environment, to test something like that, here's what we could do. We could go back to our Active Directory server. So here in Active Directory, we'll log on again. And in Active Directory, we'll go to Tools. We'll go to Active Directory Users and Computers. We'll go to our Users folder, and let's create a different user. So I'm going to right-click, select New, and let's go ahead and put in a new user. And let's call this guy IT Bob. So that'll be his logon name as well, IT-Bob. And we'll click on Next, and we'll give him a password that we can remember. Let's also say that the user doesn't have to change their password and that the password never expires for our lab environment. And we'll click on Next. So now we've got the user IT-Bob. And we'll click on Finish. So in our supplicant, if we're going to supply a new set of credentials, at the moment they're cached inside of the 802.1x client, the NAM client. So if you and I are going to use a new set of credentials, for example, IT-Bob as opposed to Bob, we need to let Network Access Manager know about it. Currently, the credentials are cached inside of this 802.1x client. To wipe out those cached credentials, what we could do is we could right-click on the AnyConnect icon. We can click on Network Repair. And when we click on Network Repair, it basically blows away the cached credentials and they're gone. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on Network Repair. And I'm going to walk over to that laptop and I'm going to put in the new credentials. And then when we reconnect to test, it's going to ask me to supply the credentials I want to use for that authentication. So what I'll do is I'll specify the username of ITBob and the password that we just created for the ITBob user. And that way, anything that's currently cached regarding the current user Bob, both in the 802.1 supplicant and more importantly over on ISE, will be a complete moot point because we're using a brand new and different user account who's trying to authenticate on port gig 0/7. Now, oh, I love computers. So over on this Windows machine, this Windows host, the laptop, it didn't actually release the credentials. So what I ended up doing is I hit this button and I deleted the profile called test. I recreated it, and then once I recreated it and connected to it, it then prompted me for my username and password. And to that, I used the username of ITBob. Now, if we take a baby step approach on this, let's take a look at the console of the switch. So, lots of details here. So, on the switch, it says the authentication result was success, and it was also from .1x, so that's a good indicator. And if we hit the up arrow key a couple of times and do a show authentication for sessions interface gig 0/7, we are authenticated as ITBob and it indicates it was a success. So to verify that, let's go back to ISE. And I did balance that port a couple of times. If we look at the details for the latest connection, and over here on the right where it shows us the steps, let's go ahead and scroll down to see whether or not we used Active Directory. And check this out. Oh, I'm so excited. So it selected 81 as our source, which is representing our Active Directory. It authenticated the user against Active Directory, and it was successful. Woohoo! So based on these results, something was cached inside of ISE regarding Bob. ISE was saying, oh yeah, it's Bob again. I've already gone through the authentication steps. He's good to go. So that was a great exercise because it gave us the opportunity to validate our sequencing for authentication sources, as well as verifying our policy for 802.1x to use our sequence that we created. In this video, we've taken a look at joining ISE into Active Directory for the benefit of using the Active Directory as an external identity source. To do that, we created an identity source sequence that we applied to the authentication rules for 802.1x that told it to try Active Directory first, and then if you couldn't find the user there, fall back to the local database on the ISE server. I have had a great time in this video. I'm so glad you joined me for it. If you have an environment that is not production, which you can practice working with ISE, and with the 802.1x and the integration with Active Directory, I strongly recommend that you practice. Because, like with most things, the hands-on practice is going to give you a lot of exposure to the product and the technology, and it can help build those skills that you can then apply to a production environment. Again, I've had a great time. I hope this video has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.